about networking, but this expands to that of, banks for a long time, the AAA banks, eventually now they just treat people like a line item on a spreadsheet, unfortunately, right? It used to be that the banks were the people that you went to, they cared about you, your family, who you were. I'm not saying that they don't, the individuals don't care, but they have restrictions in terms of their risk loss portfolio.
Welcome to the Prime People Podcast, where we cover all things that got us to where we are today, our team building strategies, the marketing and sales tips that we've learned through thousands of transactions, productivity tips, ways to really just hold yourself accountable to accomplishing what you want to accomplish, and all things content creation, personal development, and not to mention we have some of the best guests on the planet.
So, I mean, like I said in the very beginning, right? This has been a very long time coming. For the audience, rather than me just rattle on about our relationship, why don't you give me the origin story of, how we met and how you ended up at the very beginning at that first event?
Sure. Well, we started real estate investing back in March of 2015, so it's going on 6 years this month, and we started by becoming members of a real estate networking group Keyspire that many of us are part of course. And from that point forward, we said, if we're going to invest this kind of capital in our future, we need to hit the ground running. So we started right away with forming a corporation. We acquired our first multifamily building, an 8-unit that we still have, that we property manage ourselves. And from then, we've grown to, we had 9 properties. We sold the triplex last year. So we're down to 8 multifamily units in various locations in Southwestern Ontario. And we started, branching off into private equities with, land development deals, as well as back in 2018, we started doing private lending. So we had near the end of 2017 decided, is it possible? Could we leave our day jobs? And we did a lot of planning and preparation. And June 1st, 2018, we formally left our jobs. I was in the insurance industry. Doug was tech with IBM. I was with Manulife Sun Life and Manulife Bank. And we gave notice, and we timed it, I think, quite strategically, in that when our employment income went down, our interest income from private lending was supplementing, and eventually we're doing quite well right now between all of our different avenues, income streams that we're participating in. So
yeah, so March 2015, joined Keyspire, attended the big summit event that they have, met couples that we joint ventured with. So within the next 6 months or so, we had property in Midland, property in London. So that's kind of jumped in within that first year.
Mm-hmm. We've since done 8 joint ventures as the financial partners, and we have done 4 properties with one couple, 3 properties with another. We just did an 8-unit last fall with another couple that we're hoping to do potentially more buildings with as well. So it's been very fruitful. I'm a former business analyst. Doug is a math and computer science guy. So we have some, I think, very good transferable skills, organizational skills that we bring that has helped us enable us to be successful in our real estate journey to date.
Very much so. I want to unpack that. I mean, you knocked it out of the park with what I wanted to lay up for the audience is that process. Because when I met you both, the first thing I noticed, and this is just coming from a third party perspective, because I was at that summit, was how, stoic your approach was, right? You were there to learn, and you were excited about it. So the passion was there. That's always a good sign, right? If somebody's sitting in the audience here, they're spending time listening to podcasts, there's a fire kind of kindling and burning there, but you identified early on that, this was multiple paths that you could take in the real estate investing world. You identified one and you started going down that path, but you did it with a process in mind. And I didn't even know you were with IBM, actually, Doug, as long as we've known each other previously. And I did know about your past, but it makes sense now when you're like, the analytical approach that you've taken over those years has really done you well, because it's allowed you to step back from the emotional side of real estate investing and jump in when the numbers made sense. So, to expand on that first part of the conversation, when you were at that first event, what triggered the conversation around joint venture opportunities versus just doing an investment yourself from the outset?
Well, I think it had a lot to do with, we were still quite active and busy in our jobs. We really just didn't have the time. We were fortunate enough to have a substantial amount of equity in our house and our cottage at the time that we could tap into. And we're very strategic. And in fact, after joining Keyspire in March, we really took advantage of the forum, the information that was available. That's where we met our joint venture partners. We started having, email and digital communications, and we said, let's meet at the summit. And that's where we met and had, meals together and started the conversation. We started dating with our partners at that point. So, which is kind of a nice segue into, I know you've got some other questions, but today's theme is about the importance of networking. And that is something we have been very serious about and have, it's always been very top of mind whenever we go to any events is, who can we meet? What is our purpose? What do we want to get out of the evening? And so whenever we go to these events, yeah, there's going to be some education, there's some information, but who can we meet and how can they help us and how can we help them has always been our strategy. So I know we'll talk a little bit more about it, but it was about November 2014 when we started Kitchener-Waterloo Cambridge Real Estate Investors Group. And it started with just, 7 couples meeting at a restaurant, once a month. 2014. Yeah, it was 2014.
Before Keyspire?
Before, it was 20. It was 4 years. Sorry. So it was, 2016. Sorry. Yeah. So it was at that point we started meeting infrequently at restaurants. And then it just gradually grew. We needed a bigger venue. We found a hotel banquet room. And up to February of 2020, we had at least 100 people participating in our live event every the last Wednesday of every month. So we're currently on hiatus at the moment, but I do really want to get back into having live events as soon as we can. So
I do think there's a lot to the belly to belly, and that is the theme of today's, discussion is around that networking, that conversation, because I think it is irreplaceable to be in a room with somebody and have that conversation and look in their eyes and see, long tail what that conversation looks like. Because when you're picking a partnership, you're getting into business with somebody, and that process is one that is going to be lasting a while, because there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, there's going to be challenges, and you need to be able to be on the same page with your partner. So how do you go about, when you're networking, assessing the people that you want to talk to, the depths of conversations, the people that are there with good intent or not? Because you do a lot of networking, I think that would bring a lot of value.
Yeah.
You Anna's mentioned before about some people are approaching it from the standpoint of, hey, you've got money, do a deal with me. And obviously that's not the way to build relationships or get into transactions together.
When we go to, we're members of a number of groups, masterminds, and we always pre-COVID made every effort to go to at least 2-3 events per month, locally and or not. Like our furthest distance we would travel is we're in Waterloo. We would go to Oshawa quite regularly for an event there. Travel, wouldn't think about going to London for an event just if it meant we could interact and meet other individuals. But to your point, like there really is, when we approach networking as a way to establish a mutually beneficial relationship. And some events that we've been to, and unfortunately some of maybe the more millennials on the call may realize that folks with money, wealthy folks, it's all, they've earned their income, their savings, it's taken a lifetime potentially. They've been live below your means, you save for a rainy day, you sock it away into investment savings. And over time, they've accumulated a substantial amount of wealth. That it's all about wealth preservation, wealth conservation for folks with capital. So when someone approaches, regardless of the age, but to say, hey, dangle this carrot, say you can get a 30% ROI year over year. There's this, I was approached at one event and somebody had said, I need to borrow like $40,000 for a 6-month period of time. I'm going to do this. What do you say? I said, who are you? He didn't even introduce himself. I didn't even know who he was. And I said, I'd like to get to know you. No matter the returns, projected returns that somebody, that's not enough for a wealthy individual. At the end of the day, if they know, like, and trust you, that's going to make the difference as to whether they invest with you, right? So any of the events that we go to, we start talking about, how are you? What brought you here? What do you hope to get out of the event? I started thinking about, well, what are some things that maybe I could do to help them? Can they help me? it's not chit chat necessarily whether it's, what do you do? Is there something that we can connect with? And if there's something that needs to be there that's a little bit more substantial for us to continue to have a relationship. But I've been to events where literally there was a break and there was a young guy who had a handful of business cards. He had them out on display in like a deck of cards, and he wasn't even listening. He was just, and I don't know if he was there on behalf of somebody, but it was his purpose to make sure everybody in the room got a card. And it's like, I didn't bother to take a card. I said, I want to talk to you first. Oh, well, I got to get going. I said, I'm not taking a card. You're not taking the time to talk to me. So, yeah.
Crazy. I love that you answered the question the way that you did, because the amount of time that I spend at events and whatnot as well. I don't really carry business cards with me. The amount of times somebody's asked me for a card and I end up just giving them my cell phone number. I'm like, honestly, it's to me, relationships are established over time, right? And I do think what you answered will give a lot of value to people that are trying to enter this world and, say they're coming from a place where they don't have capital. That's okay. You can find capital, and we can get into that later on too, in terms of, banks are not necessarily the best opportunity for capital. Relationships are, and the opportunities come from the relational development. But just slow down, understand that, there's lots of money in different rooms. There's lots of working partners in different rooms. I'm very protective of my network and the people that are in it. And, I'm very resistant to drop somebody's name to somebody else unless that relationship has been established, right? And it's an exciting world. And again, if you take that passion, you take that fire, there has to be a little bit of temperament of your personality. And I love using you as a case study with other people and pointing them in your direction and saying, here's a nice stoic analytical approach to combined with passion, because you've done it in 6 years. The amount of real estate you've amassed in your portfolio is nothing to shake a stick at. You did it, right? You got over the fear. You somehow shut the fear out and started doing one thing and then another and then another, and your system worked. So you combined it, but you did it with what I like to see, some type of conservativeness, because the market isn't always going to be amazing. There's going to be ups and downs. So what was your mindset when you were building these relationships in your portfolio around protecting your investments or being a little bit risk averse, if there was going to be some type of market correction?
Yeah, well, we did know that we wanted to focus on multifamily. So that in itself gives some stability. We believe we've never done flips, although we're in the middle of one now with a multifamily. Somebody with experience that's doing all of the day-to-day work, which is great. The asset class and the areas. I mean, the areas that we picked were when we got into it, they were, I think, still below the radar. So the appreciation has been great, but they were cash flowing from day one. Which obviously helped with the setup and the financing and that sort of thing.
We're very much about the numbers, and the property does have to cash flow from day one at a certain point, and we like to have a minimum rate of return. So earlier, a few years ago, it was easier to find, admittedly, and with good working partners as well. Co-investors, they knew the market really well. They could find those opportunities because where we lived, we're 2 to 3 hours away from those communities. But numbers are the driver for us. It must make sense. But we also have kind of a laundry list of things that we want and don't want from a risk perspective and a cost perspective, ongoing maintenance. Like one of our joint venture co-ventures, John and Kimberly Simpson, which you've had as guests here too. I remember when we gave them kind of our wish list with our next big semi or smaller multi that we said, we wanted no elevators. We wanted no peaked roof. No flat roof. We wanted no boilers. We wanted, utilities that the tenants would pay that themselves. Just from an ongoing cost perspective, no elevators. Like it just made sense because of the profitability and the mantra, best and highest use was always, what can this property become? And the one that the last one we've done with them in Aylmer, it has the potential for, maybe we could even build on and add an extra 3 units and convert it to a 9-plex. Like wow. It's incredible what you can do. But again, we're thinking going forward, we don't want those ongoing administrative costs of day-to-day management So we factor that into our pro forma and the profitability on the long term.
I love it. I love how you look at it again from such a methodology. It's not, okay, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to get the tenants out. I'm going to renovate it. And this is the numbers I'm going to get. You look at the asset. What is it now? What could it potentially be? Who am I partnering with? What's the path to get there? You kind of break it down into easy to digest steps. Elmer is a great example of one where, I should tell you off channel about some other stuff happening in that area where you're investing in a market before the general public is really even thinking about it, right? Because you were investing in London before London was cool. I still remember that first deal, and it was a little pocket. I remember I had a conversation with John about it, and he's like, what do you think about this? I'm like, we just placed a tech tenant like 6 minutes away. It's going to be 150 to 200 high paying jobs in this area, kind of overlooked, no man's land, digging deeper. And as you go through the process, I mean, you try and tear apart the deal as you're doing the due diligence. And if it survives, then great. You've got an asset that you can sit on, and then it's, putting it on the system, letting it do what it does, and then looking for other opportunities. So you said something that a good co-friend of ours, Scott McGilvery, said in January about always kind of just trying to stay a couple steps ahead. And the secondary, the tertiary markets, and the tertiary market would be Elmer, is where, some people are starting to look, but they're hesitant because, well, it's Elmer. Like, why would I invest there? But back in 2016, when it was London, why would I invest there? What would you tell somebody that is a little hesitant to go somewhere where, the bulk of investors are not quite yet?
For me, it's all about market fundamentals too. So even though, and I've had something I didn't get a chance to mention, I became a licensed mortgage agent in May of 2020 last year. And since then, I've had, quite a number of folks reaching out to me, wanting to not just act as a mortgage agent for an acquisition, but I do quite a bit of, I facilitate a lot of private loans, private lend for mortgage, for other investors. So some of the folks are saying, well, where are your real estate investors looking? What are they doing? What markets are they in? And so it is to a degree about the property. It's also about the community where they are. So what's in the immediate vicinity of the building? Who are the main employers in the area? What's driving is there population inflow or outflow? So where the jobs are, people follow, right? They're going to need accommodations, and the realtor fundamentals, walk scores and amenities, and what are they in your hospitals, grocery, schools, transportation, all that kind of good stuff. So you kind of, if you had a drone, you looked at the building and you looked all around, because I always do a Google search whenever I see a prospective building and turn around, go up and down the street. What does it look like? What's happening? Are there any big developments? Are there condos coming in? Are they near an arterial main intersection? Gas stations, how close are they to gas stations for environmental reasons, of course. But there's a whole, mental list that I go through of looking at perspective. And I'm also cognizant of other investors who are buying properties in the communities that they're in. So, in London right now, but generally speaking, like if you wanted to borrow from an A lender will lend you anywhere. But the B lenders, like as you've accumulated more properties, you've got, you're approaching the max affordability with or risk with a particular A lender. The B lenders really like to be, it's all about marketability versus habitability. Habitability is a certain point, but
and marketability by specific neighborhood. So you had a couple of examples where, property in Hamilton sounds good, and then you find out, lenders, sorry, it's on that side of the street or around that street.
Yeah.
Sorry, not interested.
Yeah.
And I mean, sure, those are areas that are being gentrified eventually, but when you're kind of the first or earliest into that area, it's going to be tough. So that's where you want to make sure that you at least understand what you're getting into.
Generally speaking, B lenders like for you to finance properties for you that are about half an hour north and south of the 401 corridor. And then when I was telling other folks to say, if you want a property in a more remote location, a smaller town, smaller community, go to that main intersection, stand on the corner and look around and see what bank is on that corner. And that's the bank you want to deal with, because they're familiar with the residents and the type of customers that are using their location, their branch type of thing, right? So
I do think it'd be cautious. Like it would not be cautious. It would be wonderful for us to dig into the B lending side of things for a second, because we have you here. It's about networking, but this expands to that of, banks for a long time, the AAA banks, eventually now they just treat people like a line item on a spreadsheet, unfortunately, right? It used to be that the banks were the people that you went to, they cared about you, your family, who you were. I'm not saying that they don't, the individuals don't care, but they have restrictions in terms of their risk loss portfolio, right? And I know talked to people a couple of years ago at TD, they just weren't lending on multifamily because they had X amount in their portfolio and across the national covenant, right? And with B lenders, which is a world you're in, for people that aren't familiar with it, it is a relationship where, a lender like yourself will call me and say, hey, Justin, what do you think about this property? This person is thinking about doing X, Y, and Z with it. Worst case scenario, if you had to sell it, what could I do with it? And that's exactly what you're explaining to the audience, which I think is so valuable, is the marketability of it, because you're lending to somebody at a debt ratio that makes sense for them to do what they're going to do. It's faster money. You're able to fund a project. They can do a quicker turnaround, maybe not pay the same penalties they're going to pay at the bank. But ultimately, if you're going to be protecting your risk, understanding the nature of the market that property in is everything. Right. And I love what you broke into about, we'll go to the bank on the corner, because if the bank's going to fund it, they're invested in that community. It's kind of the same thing with yourself. So, when you're acting as a lender capacity and you're developing relationships with somebody that maybe is looking for private money, what do you look for in a candidate? And I guess we can touch on the networking side of things, because I'm sure that plays into it.
Yeah. I'm gonna
Yeah.
start out with that.
Well, you're doing it day to day, right?
I do it day to day right now because I get requests from individuals. So the first thing I look at the requesting party, the borrower. What have they done? What's their background? What's their experience? Have they borrowed money privately before? Have they had great success in turning over a building, if you will, from, because I work with a lot of investors, it is they like to find the underperforming, the distressed properties, the ugly ducklings, to, through, cash for keys. They do some unit turnovers, a percentage of the building, not necessarily the whole building. Then they refurbish, renovate, bring in newer, higher paying rent tenants, and then they go to the institution, refinance, pay out the private, and then they hold on to it and go from there. So I want to know, have they done this before? Have they had good success? I'll want to talk to some other people that have loaned them money. What has their experience been with them? Maybe some testimonials. I like to get a credibility package that's kind of fundamental, and that is, it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It could be, small PowerPoint or just a small package, that, because if I'm going to turn around and try and get other individuals, corporations to lend to you, I need to have a nice, concise, crisp description of you, your background, what you bring to the table, what's your value proposition, what skills, abilities, knowledge. Maybe you're not a contractor, but maybe you've got great project management skills. Maybe you're a flipper and you've had, you still work full time at. I actually know of a fellow who does it. He and his wife both still work full time, but they have access to an incredible crew that is dedicated to them. They queue up buildings and deals well in advance. The contractor knows they're going to be continuing working during that time. Before and after photos of what you've done. Even, sometimes if it's a big raise, the borrower's willing to do a Zoom meeting with prospective lenders, one-to-one questions, that sort of thing. So it's all about how you present yourself. And I find that in your knowledge and your background, but it's confidence and charisma are the two biggest things. So as much as you may be very analytical and the numbers really well, investors don't want to be bombarded with data. They want to see how well you can present the opportunity. Here's your chance. You can tell, 5 minutes or less to pitch, right?
Yeah, a lot of the lenders for the private lending side, they're investing in the people and then the deal. So you want to make sure that you've got that relationship established, so that, like you said, build the trust, and then, does this deal make sense?
Yeah,
I think that crosses all platforms. Honestly, hearing you talk, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how I hire people. That's kind of how I pick the clients I pour 150% into. it is the relationship, like you said, Doug. But I do want to ask, do you appreciate when somebody shows up prepared, or you be a little averse to somebody showing up with a briefcase and it busts open and all the papers fly everywhere? I'm sure that factors into it, right?
Oh, preparedness is huge, and how well you know your product. You should know like the back of your hand. And actually, so not because of my analytical nature, I tend to be, if you know, prospective borrowers, they say we got to do the Doug and Anna test first. We got
like
to
it.
go to them first, and whatever questions Anna may have, you know, that's good. Then we're ready, because it goes a long way. And I'm sure many people feel the same way. And when you're seeing something for the first time, I see this quite regularly. I know the kinds of questions, probing type of things to ask. But if you can have those prospective frequently asked questions prepared, responses prepared ahead of time, the speed with which you come back with a solid, you know, convincing, confident answer goes so long and so well with prospective lenders, because then they, wow, they really know their stuff, you know, as well as anticipate questions that they think about later after they get off the call or after they've seen your presentation. But you know, an FAQ slide or a page that saves you time and energy too. So I've done enough of these now that if you can go in crisp, this is what you want, this is what Anna's looking for, or Doug, then it just saves me time, saves you time. Yep, okay, I can go out to my lender audience and we can get the funds you're looking for, right? Or we can be, because we do a lot of private lending ourselves. We do invest our own capital in deals.
Yep.
And that was kind of the impetus for me to want to become a mortgage agent was, you know, we'd have, at our networking event, we'd have people coming up to us saying, you know, Doug, you guys lend money. Like, what do you look for? How do you vet a deal? How do you vet the borrower? And then I would get, well, people would come to us and say, here's a great opportunity. Doug and I, do you want to invest? You know, a lot of kind of questions. And then, yes, we're investing. So came to the point where people were looking for good deals. All of our capital was out in circulation deployed. We didn't have any available capital, or it was coming back in maybe in 3 months. They needed the money now. And of course, people. So wow, they have the money, they need the money, they're good people. And so I would just kind of, at our events, would just say, hey, you guys may want to have a conversation, just a quick little referral. And it was so gratifying to see through the months that we've been doing this, how many people were connecting and becoming business partners, right? So this is, you know, to lead into the whole networking thing, how successful it can be. I mean, there's caveats. I don't advocate necessarily for one party or the other, but I just say you may want to have a conversation, or there's some commonality that I think you can, if the connection it happens and the personalities jive, that's wonderful. But I kind of think about that before I make a suggestion, or if it was at one of our networking events, and I'll say, well, you know what, you might want to have a conversation with that person before you leave tonight. And we were at an event not too long ago, and I was referred, somebody said, oh, I've heard your name before. And I said, oh, and in a good way. And they said, yes, you're the connector. You connect people. And I said, wow, well, I never really thought of it that way, but that's one of the benefits of being coordinating networking events, as well as participating in networking events as an attendee, is sharing what you know, but also, you know, making referrals, making suggestions. If somebody says, well, do you have a contractor? As long as you can come up with, or an accountant, come up with 2 or 3 names, that way you're referring and you're not recommending necessarily, right? So that's one of the beauties of being part of a network.
You're the money matchmaker when I think about it, right? And I mean that have a skill set, you understand the language. There's people that don't understand the language, you know, they could go out there and they could get taken advantage of. I think one of the reasons I do this and we host these events is, again, I'm just connecting people. I even tell people when we meet and we talk about investing and whatever that looks like, I'm like, the transaction is like the smallest part of what we actually offer. If I can introduce you to Doug and Anna and she can protect you in that world, then I've done more than I could possibly imagine in terms of offering value, right? If I can put you in a position where you call me about a property and I say, don't buy that because of X, Y, Z, because I know that it doesn't necessarily fit what you're looking for, but you don't have your reps in. That's what I do, right? I'm the matchmaker for properties. For
Right.
you, I love that thought that, you know, you identified that you had a skill set, you were passionate about something, got into an industry to provide a value added and layered service. Your network is truly your net worth, and you've done a good job protecting your network and the integrity of that. as you've grown. One question that I had as you were speaking was, when people are coming up and they're presenting, or you're connecting people with other people, I'm sure there's been instances where somebody comes in and they're over explaining, they're name dropping, they're talking like they know the language, and you can really smell that they don't. And you know that that integrity piece isn't there. What would be some ear markers that you would warn people of in a situation like that, where they're in a situation where maybe somebody sounds very flashy and quick moving and throwing opportunities their way? What would you suggest somebody do to maybe slow down for a second and analyze the opportunity?
First and foremost, refer them to professionals, just, the licensed professionals, an accountant or a lawyer. Or
Mm-hmm.
I've had that happen where somebody, a couple of times actually, where folks have said, well, I've heard this and I'm going to, suggest doing this. And I said, talk to your lawyer first, or talk to your accountant first and get another opinion, get
Mm-hmm.
another professional opinion, or get an opinion from someone who's actually done it, and get some thoughts. But having been a business analyst previously, that was my job. I need to do talk to a whole host of people, pros and cons, and make an assessment and then a judgment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I will never make a decision just based on one person's opinion, or one person saying, you got to do this. Well, okay, well, let's see. And I'll do Google search, or I'll talk to other people and say, this person so-and-so, what do you think? Or I'll talk to my lawyer, that type of thing, right?
And your comment as part of the question about slow down, with business deals, obviously you want to make sure that you're not just jumping in, that you know everything that you can possibly to prepare for the deal. And hanging out, going to dinner, longer term relationships on our JVs. It was about 6 months of talking, getting to know them before we jumped in together. On the last one, it was probably a year or a couple of years actually,
Getting to know them,
of getting to know them, and then having the right deals come through.
Mm-hmm.
Are they willing to do the work, right? And I think online and with social media and us having to be socially distanced right now too, I think a lot of people can get caught up in the YouTube and Instagram fame of some of this world, because it seems very exciting too. But you and I both know that we've seen on the back end that sometimes there is a Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, and it's prudent to make sure that you understand. And everybody I respect does exactly what you said. My mentors, the people who've guided me to do what we've done, I always notice that, again, I say stoicism for you, it's the same thing for them, right? They always have this, well, we'll get there. We'll get there. They kind of build the relationship to see if the person that they're working with is tracking to the person that they put out publicly, right? Because if the person that they're putting out publicly doesn't line up with the person that they are, well, that's an integrity piece, right? That is something that, what else are they hiding, right? What is their end game? Because if you're forming a relationship with somebody and you're taking capital that you've paid tax on, you've worked your whole life for, you're investing into something that you're going to be spending hours and years potentially to build long-term wealth with, you need to make sure that you line up with the right people. And there's different people for different people. There's some people that I don't line up with, and that's okay. They've got their people. There's some people that you line up with that I'm sure I line up with, right? But it's all about using your community and a sounding board to vet what you're looking to accomplish, and you don't have to just jump at anything willy-nilly. How do you look for those sounding boards, those mentors, those people that you respect? What are some attributes about them that really seem to line up consistently?
I think we like to chat with people who have had success, and who are very willing to share challenges as well. Because, as I said, there's two sides to every coin, pros and cons. And I like to know, well, how did you overcome that? What kind of barriers did you incur? What would you do differently if you had the chance to do it over again, type of thing, right? So it's I'm kind of a research junkie. Doug is too. Like we talk to a variety of folks. We don't, as I said, we analyze the deal, but we go in with, we don't have paralysis by analysis. That is, there's a point at which we need to make a decision, and is there moderate degree of risk that we're accepting that we could then go ahead and proceed with, but we don't want to delay and say, oh, a confused mind says no. So if you don't know what you're doing, don't understand the project, then you will absolutely not participate. But if you have someone who does research, understands, something that I've noticed, there is there's the romance, the excitement of real estate, but there's also the practical and the earth, the grounding that, some folks don't like to necessarily hear.
Mhm.
And so sometimes, I'm that grounding force. Doug's a great grounding force for me. It's just, well, did you think about this? Or what are the tax implications? Or another aspect that, you need to incorporate.
Yeah, and one of the things too that, I mean, not every transaction or every action results in, success.
Yeah.
Even things that don't go your way. Okay, well, it's education.
Mhm.
What did it cost you, and what did you learn from it? So, can you make some changes so that the next time you go in, eyes open? So that's one thing.
Yeah, it's talking to a lot of people like yourself, Justin, and to say, okay, well, where's this market heading, or what's going on in this community that will enable, population growth, job growth. It's talking to other folks. Why do you invest where you're investing? Tell us, a little bit about and as the challenge that they've faced, and how did they overcome them. So it really is when we're thinking about, we're big planners. We don't just jump right in. And it's often months, if not, months in the planning type of thing. Like right now, we're looking to scale up and go into larger multifamilies, potentially 12, 20 units. And so we're taking courses, we're doing all sorts of reading, we're focusing on presentations that are talking about things to consider if you're going into the multifamily space. We're working with people now who have done it and are doing it, and we're learning from them, and we're seeing by example. So I think in a roundabout way, come full circle back to your question, it's when we have, how do we overcome or plan for, it's a lot of research, a lot of questions, it's a lot of investigation. We're not opposed to, and maybe that's a skill set through our working careers, that as analysts, we go in, we take the information, we assess it, we interpret it. I used to work in the pension in the financial services industry, and one of my jobs was as a specialist to convert to layman's terms some of the legal jargon, mumbo jumbo type of thing, right? So I'm used to doing that, and that maybe not that critical thinking skill may not be something everyone has. So you probably want to approach somebody who has that ability to say, okay, what does this mean? One of the things that for KWC REI, my meetup group, I also have a Facebook site, and I like to post all sorts of articles about, what's happening in real estate, what's happening in the mortgage front, what's happening, macroeconomic indicators, interest rates, because I find that, some sites, they just flip the article and say, hey, this is a great read.
Mhm.
I like to take the juicy nuggets from that read and say, this is the critical thing you need to take from this article and what this means, because, I'll have people, when text clients say, I need to get in on the market. I need to buy a multifamily. Let's meet, let's talk. And I'm thinking, whoa, what's the rush? What's going on? I said, well, interest rates are going up, and this whole FOMO fear that's happening out there.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, Tiff Macklin, the Bank of Canada governor, has gone on record saying interest rates aren't going anywhere for at least 2022, 2023. The government's got a huge deficit. Do you think they're going to want interest rates to go up anytime soon? And then I said, variable rates. So just earlier this month, the overnight rate stayed at 25%. That usually stays for 3 months before the variable rates aren't going anywhere. And then there's, mumble jumble in the industry about fixed rates are going up. Well, then marginally, they may go up by 25 basis points by the end of the year. But interest rates are irrelevant to an investor. So are you really going to let the fear of a potential 10, 25 basis point increase in rates justify your spending right now? Wait for the market, find the market, get the property you want. Be patient. It'll happen.
I love that. I was smiling and nodding my head the whole time. I read all your articles, so I'd suggest everybody go to KWCRI. I'm going to actually put the links in the Evergreen video so everybody can go there. I still owe you a talk. I know Jamie Dodds crushed it for me when I wasn't able to make it, I think because of the weather that one time, but that group is very concise. I think there's a big problem with the media out there now and what they disseminate. I don't even read it, quite frankly. And when people start talking to me about what everybody else is talking about, I go the other direction, right? Because interest rates go up. Awesome. You got a whole bunch of people that are up for renewals that are going to sell their properties all of a sudden. Maybe the cap rates go up to like 5.5. You can maybe buy it at 6, turn it into a 7 or a 9. Great. It's an opportunity. My father-in-law taught me a lesson a long time ago where when the auto industry, when the recession happened, he took the newspaper, walked his sales guys outside, put it across the road and said, I'm not taking part. If everybody's going to bury their head in the sand, I'm going to find opportunity. He took like llamas and chickens on trades. Farmers needed trucks. They wrote an article about him in the news because he was the only one that grew during the recession. And, you know, it's finding ways to get creative. I know creativity has always been something that I respect about the both of you. Even though you have, you know, a tempered approach, you're not afraid to pull the trigger and do a deal. And again, this is why when I explain, you know, your story to other people, or I'm sending somebody to you or your network, and I give context to the relationship and why I respect your approach, it's because of both sides of that coin, right? Of understanding, like, I almost hear you talk and think, this is like a real life video game to you guys, right? There's a book by Eric Sue that I'm reading right now called Level Up. And this guy was like one of the top gamers in the world. He's got a great podcast and he's talking about how if gamers that are like obsessed with video games took the same application to life, right? And went and found power-ups and we're always trying to level up and find new tools and like new armor, new weapons and equip themselves and go out and find new things. Like it's the exact same approach that you're taking to your business. And you're doing it consistently over time. So with that said, if you met Doug and Anna at the very beginning now, what advice would you give them?
Wow. I'll let you start with that one.
Gee, thanks. So when we first got in, we had full-time jobs, so we're aiming long-term wealth appreciation, and that's worked. Once we retired, then the focus kind of became on immediate cash flow, and that was kind of the private lending side of things. The one thing we look at, some of the deals that come through, I think getting in as a portion of the business on the flipping side. I think doing that a bit earlier would have helped to bring up the capital sooner. I mean, we were able to refinance a couple of our properties within the first year and a half without really doing any work on it. So we got lucky on the appreciation there. And
we knew what markets we were in.
Sorry, not
you sure
lucky.
did. Yeah, no, I know.
But most of the others, we haven't done the refinances, and so the growth is still there. Would be nice to get a little bit more capital a little bit earlier, but you know, we're not putting our eggs all in one basket either.
Yeah.
Well, because you're building these portfolios that are again just generational wealth building tools, but you also realize now what you can do with capital, and if you had more capital, what that deployment of capital would look like. Which, I mean, you're both still young, you got lots of time, and that's exciting. Anna, what would you tell yourself if you were younger? Kind of start mentoring yourself in this game.
Well, again, background being an analyst, it was kind of easy to get caught up in the, oh my gosh, there's a squirrel, there's something else I gotta look at, you know, and just kind of ingest that. And it was a point where we just said, okay, enough. We got enough information, enough material. We need to make a decision, pull the trigger kind of thing, right? But it was really, we were still so focused on our careers. We were in, you know, good, responsible, high-paying jobs. The focus really changed for us. As I said, we started in March 2015, but we also became Keyspire Workshop Consultants, and we were on part of the travel team from October 2016 to December 2019. And traveling quite regularly. Initially, we were once a month, then we started doing twice a month and weekly, and meeting all sorts of other people across Canada. The other workshop consultants, you know, give full credit to them. They were very active investors as well. And it was almost a challenge every time we were, you know, we're going to be going out to Vancouver. Who's on the team? Oh, we got to do something before we meet them, you know, like it was kind of that motivation, that accountability.
Yeah, for sure.
Very much, we got to do something. We need to make a decision. We're going to act. That was a big, huge influence on what we eventually ended up doing in our careers. Was being around other like-minded individuals, seeing what they were doing, how they're progressing, what resources did they have access to. Yeah, that made all the difference for us. So to come back full circle, I guess I would say hang out with those folks much earlier than we ended up doing.
Iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
It's one of those that you make me want to go flip something, and I don't flip. That's just not what I do, right? But it's funny hearing you say that, and I know so many of those wonderful people, and it's fun. It's like I said, right? It's collaboration, not competition. It's getting around like-minded people, and you could always, you can smell it again if you're talking about relationship building and networking, and you're in an environment where people have that scarcity mindset, and they get nasty and they throw digs because you're finding some level of success. Usually comes from a place of insecurity in their own growth and goals, and you get around people that really drive you and motivate you, and you're having fun with it. There's more than enough deals to go around for everybody. But that said, what do you think stops most entry-level investors from actually taking that first step?
Fear. Top, first and foremost, fear. And again, lack of information, lack of understanding. Can't say enough about a confused mind says no. Not being around the right people. So is Warren Buffett is attributed to saying you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, or the average of the people you spend the most time with. That is so true, because if you are the smartest person or the most experienced person in the room, there's not a heck of a lot. I mean, it's great for sharing and you're going to be a great resource, but you're going to have 4 people draining you for all your knowledge, and it won't be a reciprocal situation where you're going to glean something of value for you going forward. So where there's a scenario where you can share, but also get, learn and grow from, that's ideal. That's the sweet spot, right? Because, you may have experienced something that they haven't, but then of course they may be doing something that you want to do, you want to aspire towards, right? So it is so critical to be near people and around people who are doing what you want to do.
Yeah, and the comment on fear, if you're experiencing something that you've never experienced before and it's a problem and you're by yourself, it's a really big deal. If you go and talk to a bunch of other real estate investors, oh yeah, all you need to do is this.
Call this guy.
We've met people that, oh yeah, I don't mind buying properties that seem to have structural cracks or whatever, because we have people that know how to fix those.
For sure.
And typically the thought on, well, what's it going to cost me? People with no experience, 25,000, whatever, I'm out of here. Whereas these people can take advantage of that because they know they've got the knowledge and they've got the history of being able to solve those kinds of problems.
For sure. And one of the first deals I watched you do was a deal that sat on the market for 8 months. Everybody overanalyzed it. Oh, it's stigmatized. Nobody else wants it, so I don't want it. And after you did that deal, I use it as a case study all the time. I'm like, every single person would have done that deal now. So I think, understanding the lens of which to look through things, and you make me think a lot about advice that I give younger agents where they come and something seems like a huge deal. I'm like, that's like a 1 out of 10. There's a girl actually that called me recently. She was being taken advantage of by a landlord. She told me it was happening. She moved in day 1. There was definitely not quite an enjoyment, and it wasn't a good landlord. It was not somebody like you guys, and I wish she would have been in one of your buildings. I gave her one phone number. She made one phone call, and it was dealt with in 2 hours. But she had been trying to work this out for like 2 weeks, right? So again, just understanding that there's people out there that will help you, getting around people that inspire you. They're so giving, because I think there's 2 parts to that coin. One, you've always done a job leveling up and finding people that are just doing things you can't think are possible, and they're giving you to you because they have people that are pouring into them. But there's a trickle down effect, because I've also watched you pour into other people. Nobody pays you to do those events, but you're still bringing people in, walking them through that process, pouring into them. And again, I think of it as a row of parking meters in the busiest beach town in maybe Grand Bend, Ontario. And all of a sudden, all the meters are going to expire. And if one person goes and fills up 19 other meters, and then the next person comes in and fills up 19 other meters, and they don't worry about their own meter, you get a collective of people doing that, think about that world, right? Where you have people filling up each other's cups. And I definitely appreciate, you guys coming in and pouring into everybody today. We're tracking 44 attendees. There was, or 48 participants, 61 registrants, which is incredible. Zoom usually are maybe getting a small percentage of the amount of registrants, and you've held them this entire time. So kudos to you. I'll tell Scott McGilvery that you're vying for the top spot. I will have Lindsay take over and ask you some questions. We got some Q&A, and then we will get you out of here so you can enjoy your Saturday.
Right.
Awesome. Any parting words for the audience if you had to send one more message, or you had a billboard for every investor on the planet out there?
Just do it, but make an informed decision, do the pros and cons, assess, evaluate. The only thing I wanted to mention just real quick is a lot of people are finding, where do you find the good cash flowing properties? It's not where you find them, it's how you make them. So where, yes, maybe 3, 5, 10 years ago, the 1% rule, sometimes maybe the 2% rule applied, that the cash flow was, at least 1% of the purchase price of gross rents. But now what I'm finding a lot of investors are doing really creatively, it's like, okay, you go see a property, can I convert that from a 3-bedroom unit to 2 units, a 2-bedroom and a 1-bedroom unit? Can I, scale up? What are the biggest and highest best use that I can make of this property, right? How can you increase income and decrease expenses? What are those opportunities, ways that you can make this property work? And don't be afraid of the ugly ducklings, because really go get some quotes and analysis. We have, good friends that go in when they see a property. They said, we have our entourage. They bring their realtors in with them. Their
I like it
with them, and maybe even they time it. So, okay, let's see, what can we do? What are some key flaws? What are some things? Like, they got to get the thing under contract. So that's it. You get it under contract with a condition of maybe inspection, not necessarily financing. You've done your research. You've talked to a broker or whomever. You've got the capital. You've really thought seriously about the building. You may or may not have had to even. You just got to get it locked down. That's what all the most successful investors do. They just, okay, I see it, I like it, I'm going to put this, and then they go in and see the building. They're not trepidatious about going through it first and then deciding humming or hawing. You've missed the boat. You got to go in, get it locked in, do all your due diligence, and then use your findings as leverage to negotiate the price down.
I like it. Tear apart the deal, get in there, pull the trigger. Don't be afraid. We write lots of conditional deals that don't go together, so that's totally normal. So, Lindsay Gowan, would you like to take over?
Awesome. Wow. So much value added this morning. I am so glad that I could be here and be a part of this, because we talk about getting practical and tactical, and you guys have given the viewers so much, and no wonder they've all stayed on. There's just so much value being shared. So I remember actually I went to a meetup event in London, and you guys were there, and it was one of my first events ever, and I go to these events on my own, so I was terrified, nervous, and I remember seeing you guys there, and you're so welcoming. So really appreciate you guys and just your willingness to work with people and just welcome people into your community. I think that says a lot about you guys, and yeah, this morning has been awesome. But we do have some questions, and for anyone in the audience, if you guys have any questions as well, make sure that you're putting them into the Q&A box, as we're just going to go down them. And yeah, the great thing about this is it's a live podcast, but it's interactive, so you guys get to ask your questions and get some awesome advice from these experts. So first one here is Diana Tang says, living in Toronto GTA, how can you find affordable investments? Do you stay within your area or go far out and invest? Where your distance to manage the property is quite far, what do you suggest?
So what we have our son and daughter-in-law actually live in the GTA, and a couple of years ago, when the market 2017 was actually kind of going up and crazy, but really their jobs, they really couldn't afford to buy property there right now. So absolutely what we've been encouraging them to do is buy a property outside of the GTA within, an hour to an hour and a half, because that's where the better performing, the cash flowing opportunities reside, is outside of the GTA. Unless, of course, you want to do a joint venture and you have several investment partners that could help finance something. But go ahead.
Yeah, and when we first started, as part of our story, we're obviously looking close to Waterloo on purchasing property. Even 2016, looking at the numbers, I thought that they were overpriced and not attainable. But that's, and I mentioned JVs, so we're able to have our joint ventures in London and Midland, so a number of hours away from us to manage the properties.
I think a lot of folks are just starting out, they feel they need to have it nearby. They want to be able to drive by, lick the bricks, as Fonso Quadra likes to say, but it doesn't have to be that way. With good partners, good working financial co-venturers, or sorry, working co-venturers, absolutely, you can make that relationship work, or good property managers that they can manage and maintain the property for you. So it doesn't have to be nearby. And I mean, we've done Southwestern Ontario, and our daughter lived in Alberta for a little bit. At one point, had she stayed out there, we probably would have bought out there for her or with her.
But we've got friends of ours that are living, Vancouver, Victoria, and they're investing in New Brunswick.
Yeah. So it really is a matter of finding good resources, good people, and getting away from that fear of, oh my gosh, I have to be able to see it. No, you don't. Good people to manage it. We got to a point, I think, was it our 5th or 6th properties we bought sight on? We saw the picture. We never went into the building until 6 months later. And that was even just a quick walk in, and we haven't been back since.
But the working partner deal with that.
Yeah, working partner does a fantastic job. Keeps us in the loop, and we don't have to see it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, so we have a few questions here from Ann Bossy. So we are, first one is, do you develop relationships with people who don't have these analytical skills, different working background, or do you consider these skills crucial in any partnership?
What's your definition of analytical? I guess, like, if somebody can assess a deal, I don't mean for them to be an analyst, but it's really picking the pros and cons, or having a full awareness of the property. We want somebody to work with someone who, has done it before potentially, or has the ability to think about potential things that could happen with the property, right? So one of the things when we are in the dating period with a prospective working partner is to think about any and all scenarios, things that could happen to a building. And, what would you do if the tenant calls, they've got a pipe burst, there's water coming from wherever, what would you do? And so you ask them, the prospective working partner, how would you address that issue? What if the snow removal company says, hey, we're not going to clear your snow anymore? How do you handle that? Or you think about the practical day-to-day. Tenant dies in the building. What do you do? So you have to think about a what if list. So those kinds of, I wouldn't say analytical skills, but just, practical day-to-day, how would you handle, and what their response is. And if you agree with that, then that's, indications that you want to continue this relationship. Or how would you add to that?
No, it goes back to relationships and experience.
Yeah, I mean, if they have good people, like we don't expect them to do the like the QuickBooks, the accounting, but if they have good people that work with them that can manage that. Because remember, with a joint venture, especially the ones we do 50-50, we have to claim the income, we have to claim half the expenses. So do they. We need to make sure our accountants are agreeable to maybe talking to one another. We want to make sure their platform that their accountant is using is compatible with our, like, we go down a rabbit hole a lot with some stuff, and we like to anticipate and plan, because we're really big planners. But so if you can work with someone who thinks about the longer term and the weird what if scenarios, that's a good thing.
That's awesome. This one kind of adds on to it. So I would like to know more about JV partnerships other than financial or working. Have you done any other types of splits? For example, both partners are financing. So yeah, if you guys have done that, or if you want to get into that at all.
I think JVs is another conversation altogether. You could really digress and go down a big rabbit hole. We have done 50-50 on most of them. One of them we did 55-45. where we were the financials at 55%. I kind of, if you're going to go into a deal with more than one party, so there's you and another part, to maybe two others, it does introduce a new host of challenges because there was one, I was on one site recently and somebody said, well, somebody wants to do 10% because they're doing mortgage qualification. Somebody wants to do 30% and the other wants to do whatever the balance of the share was. And I said, that's going to be complicated. And so one person was going to qualify for the mortgage and be on title. And then the other party was going to be the bigger cash infusion or whatever. And I said, so complicated, make it simple, keep it, don't get, because then you're going to wonder, okay, so if down the road, let's say you need to do a cash call. So there's a major capital expenditure you have to do. Should the largest investor or the party that has the biggest share, should they equally now be responsible for a bigger share of any capital expenditures going forward, right? Or should the person who's just, the 10% share, like how that share remains throughout the lifetime of the JV? And does that make sense for ongoing administration of that property and building? So it's,
we don't have an experience with
yeah,
other than the
yeah.
typical 50-50 working partner, financial partner.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the way that I've structured my joint ventures as well, as that 50-50 split. But I think it definitely comes down to what the relationship is. And there's so many different ways, as you said, that you can structure it. So it just depends on that relationship. It depends what you're offering. And the great thing about joint ventures is you can kind of detail them to whatever situation comes up. We actually, this is fresh because we talked about this in our clubhouse room on Thursday. With a group of women. We do Thursday at 5 p.m. If any of you guys are interested, we do women investing in real estate. And we talked about joint ventures, and it really depends on what each is getting out of it. But when you get into more complicated situations, you're going to need a more detailed partnership agreement for sure. So the 50-50 split, I find, is the most easy. But yeah, there's definitely different ways of doing it. So that's awesome. Okay, we've got another question here from Ryan Labong. There is a myth that you have to be an extrovert and outgoing in order to be an effective networker. What are your thoughts on this, and what are your advice to effectively nurture business relationships / network?
Wow, that's a very, very profound, thoughtful question there, Ryan.
So I still regard myself as an introvert, but I'm trying to be up to the challenge to get out there and meet people. I know that we've attended events where you look around and you see somebody off to the side that's trying to avoid talking to people. So it's taken me a little while to try and target those people to get them out of their comfort zone.
Well, and that's the point I was gonna,
like this too.
The point I was gonna really say is that I find it very courageous for folks who may not have a natural inclination to be as outgoing and assertive potentially, but there is a point of you need to get out of your comfort zone and be willing to chat and talk to other people. One thing I wanted to just mention real quickly, if you are one of those people who find it maybe difficult beyond, hey, how are you? What brought you here? And then, okay, now what? And you're looking at the floor and each other's feet. Remember this acronym, FORD, FORD. So F stands for family. So start talking about, just breaking the ice, what your family members, you have kids, O stands for occupation. So what do you do for a living? Or how do you keep yourself busy? That sort of thing. R stands for recreation. So what do you do to have fun? Are you into sports? What do you do as a hobby type of thing? But D is dreams. So you talk to them about, okay, so where do you see yourself 2 to 5 years from now? Like, what are your longer term goals and aspirations? You need to make yourself memorable at a networking event, because if you're asking and doing the same thing as everybody else, you're a blur. At the end of the night, well, I know I met with a whole bunch of people. I don't remember anybody. You may have taken a business card or two, but Doug's really great for this. Like he's publicly said he's not as much of an introvert, or he is an introvert, not as much of an extrovert. He'll take the business card and he'll write a key little nugget about what they talked about, what was memorable about that conversation with that person. He has a book he brings to the meetups. And he writes down everybody he met in that memorable moment about them.
So I like business cards with white space on the back of the card,
Yeah.
so you have a spot to write.
Yeah. So you don't have to be an extrovert. You just need to know the art of conversation. And so remember the acronym FORD: family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. You will be memorable by that other party.
That's
You
awesome.
took the time to get to know them, and be the one who's doing asking the questions. If you're talking, talk well. Here I am. If you're talking too much. You need to be pulling, drawing, find out, and especially in the responses, if they say, well, we brought you here. What are you hoping to get out of the evening? Start thinking about, how can I help them? How can they help me? Right. And you come with a purpose. And when we go to networking events, well, how many people, it's not how many people you want to meet that day. Well, what are we doing right now? Maybe we could talk to her, find, somebody that can help us with this issue or problem. And then when you start talking to other people and say, hey, do you know anybody here who's done this? And maybe you might want to point that out to us. Come with a purpose, come with something you want to get out of the evening, come back with a list of names, contacts, referrals. You need to get something out of it. It's not just an event you go to and go back home and say, well, because you might say, well, that was a waste of 2 hours of my time. Yeah, it was, because you didn't take the most advantage of it to make the most out of it, right? So
I love that. That is some practical advice again. Awesome, because I know how uncomfortable it can be, especially going on your own. So if you have a friend, you can always bring them with you as a crutch. But I love that you are asking the questions, because I find how uncomfortable it is to kind of do these podcasts, but it's a lot easier asking the questions and then making someone else come up with the answers. So I love that. So our next question is from Sonia. I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name as well. I'm not going to even try and butcher that. How to connect your working partners. Would like to start private lending, not sure how to start.
So you're wanting to find a working partner. Again, when you go to a networking events, referrals are really big. You want to be connected with good, reputable, credible, successful individuals. And if you find out somebody who's been doing JVs as a financial partner, well, who do you use as your working partner, right? That's the best compliment you can also give your working partner, is to send others their way, provided they're willing and able, and then they hopefully make the connection, right? But yeah, that's what I start with. What do you do?
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I was looking ahead at some of the questions.
Yeah. Just about working partners. How do you find them?
Yeah, the working, if you want to be passive, then yes, you're looking for people either in specific areas, and therefore you target those networking events. And there's a question about perhaps recommendations versus referrals versus introductions. If we've gone based on experience, here's our experience with these people, or we've known these people to do these kinds of projects. Maybe you want to talk to them.
Yeah, because the one thing that I was actually on another call this week where there was a couple of lawyers on the call, and they were talking about referral versus recommendation, and you don't want the fear of getting into legal hot water. If, let's say, you refer somebody to someone and then they get into a business arrangement, it goes sour or sideways, what are the liability implications to you having referred them to that? It's like, we're all adults here. You can make a decision. You don't need to point to someone else and say, hey, because of your referral, I went into business. No, you had an equal opportunity to assess them, do your due diligence before making a decision. That's just a weak blame game type of thing, right? So that would not hold up in court, and I wouldn't want people to feel that they are responsible for that. So, but that's why I say, if you're going to ask, if somebody asks you who would you suggest, you should have at least 2, minimum 3 names. Therefore, you're not committing to any one, and then you give them choice, and they can hopefully make a judgment call and do the appropriate due diligence to make before they arrive at a decision.
Definitely. Awesome. Okay, so we have a question here from Amelia and Karen. Hi, Anna and Doug. Great discussion this morning. Question for you. If the value of funds from a primary residence via home equity line of credit and refi are the same, which is the preferred method to consider to use to fund an income property apart from interest rate aside?
So
HELOC or refi, what's the
yeah,
best
it
way?
really depends what you're wanting to do. So HELOC is a really great source of money for short-term use. So if you want to use it as a down payment on a property, you need to have a plan. How am I paying back the HELOC within the year or within 18 months? So you can use it for that. Remember though that, so if from a credit perspective, if you're in acquisition mode and you're wanting to get another property shortly thereafter, or even yet another, the balance outstanding on the HELOC is going to have a little bit of a, a negative influence on your ability to qualify for the next properties, right? So it depends. Do you want to, and if the property can support an increased borrowing, so if you refinance and pull out 100, 150K, you now have a higher mortgage of principal and interest, and you must now meet that monthly obligation. But if you use that money towards another down payment, that's great. But if you're wanting to borrow to then just use as temporary, and that next building is going to be able to help you pay it down, pay it off, that's better, because then you have continual access to that HELOC money, versus if you take one mortgage, now it needs to be committed to 2 other deals type of thing, right? So it really depends what you're wanting to do, how many other properties you're going to get, and how quickly you're wanting to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I find a lot of these mortgage questions as well. It all depends on your situation, right? So it's good to talk to your preferred mortgage broker and really get into what you're trying to achieve as well. So that is awesome. Okay, next question is, as a money partner, how do you assess the split in a JV?
Well, for us, it's pretty much 50-50. I think a lot of people, and what I've seen posted is, the money partners, until you've done a deal, you think, hey, I'm the money partner, I should have a bigger split, or more than half, or what value do they bring to the table? There was a really interesting question posted on, I think it was one of the sites that I follow, and the money partner was kind of, yeah, hey, I'm bringing the money, you couldn't do it without me. You can't buy that property without, well, I mean, you could certainly buy that property, but you couldn't manage that deal. The skill, the experience, the value proposition that the working partner brings to the deal should not be discounted. Our working partners work damn hard. Yes, they respect and understand, and the money that we've saved to this point to acquire that property has been great. But if we don't know how to manage it, we don't have the time to manage it. That's the value they bring to the arrangement, right? So I will always go into a deal where it's possible 50-50, because we tremendously value the contribution of our working partners. They work damn hard for their share of the money.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, last question. If anyone has any other ones, just make sure you get it into the Q&A. We do kind of do a hard out at 10:30 so that you guys can get over to brunch with Jazz if that is your next destination this morning. So last question here is, wondering, in a market to where a lot of properties are going over list price, are there words to offer buyers? I think some of us are leery about our buyers overpaying, yet as you stated, if we were to look back, we would have done things differently. Hope that makes sense.
So where a lot of properties are going over list price, are there words to offer the buyers? I guess it depends on the type of property that are you looking at residential, or you're looking at commercial property? Because some commercials are also going over ask too. But in the residential space, I know a lot of people have said, well, here, write a letter to the buyer, express how much this property means to you and such. Quite frankly, as an investor, that really wouldn't go over as well, especially if there's 8 or 9, 10 letters to look at. It's flexibility, I find. So have your agent work with the seller's agent to say, what's their motivation? What's their driver? Why are they selling? What would be meaningful for them? Maybe they want the flexibility of a longer close. So maybe you leave the close date open and they decide when you close the property. Or as an investor, if I'm buying an investment property, I would always do the double offer, right? So, or if it's a commercial, you want to do a VTB and then a regular offer. The VTB with a higher acquisition price, but with, they have that VTB component versus a lower price, but a little bit more flexibility, right? So it really is what does the buyer want? And you give them what they want. And
Seller.
so, sorry, what does the seller want rather? And you give them what they want. The other thing is you need to do your due diligence too. So you need to get comps of immediate of prices that have sold in the products of equivalent comparables that have sold in the immediate area in the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And because you hear stories about all these out of town buyers coming in and prices going 100K over asking. It's like, well, no, that's what the market has done in the last 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things. So the seller, in theory, has to sell. The buyer doesn't have to buy. So if you look at the price of a property, okay, for your intended project, does this make sense? If you're going to completely rehab it and convert it to higher end rentals, add more units into the building, maybe it does justify it. If you want to be able to purchase it as a straight cash flowing from day one property, maybe it doesn't make sense. And you know, just because it's for sale doesn't mean that you have to buy it.
Yeah.
Only if it makes sense.
I would just add that a lot of the investors I'm working with as well, they see the after value vision of what it's going to look like. So you need to compare it to other properties that are where your property wants to be or where it wants to go. So if the appraisal will be based on the as is current conditions, and the appraiser will look at other properties very similar to yours, apples to apples. No, 3-bedroom, 2-bed bath, same similar square footage, similar amenities, single car, detached or attached garage. Like they will look at the same like for like. But if you see the potential that this building is going to enable you to have a duplex, secondary suite, so now you want your realtor to find properties that are identical to where you want it to look like, and that's the value you place on the property. So if you want to have a secondary suite duplex, so let's say it's a single family home right now, 550, but duplex is in the area fully completed where you want it to go, or selling for 720, then yeah, you might want to come in a little bit higher because you know where it's going to be as opposed to where it is now, right? So that's the one thing I would consider. And don't be afraid to go over ask, because it's going to be that in 6-8 months when you're done. So
awesome. Yeah, seeing that extra value as after repair value. Okay, I have one question for myself. I've been asked this a couple times, and I know that you started your journey later in life, your real estate investing journey. So I do get a lot of questions when people are closer to retirement and they're a little bit more nervous. They're like, we don't have these years to make up any money that we lose, so we're nervous to get started. What advice would you give to those people who are starting later in life with their journey and are a little bit more nervous?
So we started, I'm 57 now, that's 61, and almost 6 years. Have a plan, have a goal. And Keith Barr teaches us there's 3 main pillars: is property, there's private lending, and private equity. But we said, you know what, we wanted to buy 10 properties in 5 years. We wanted 10,000 a month in income from real estate. And so, you kind of reverse engineer it and say 5 years from now, that's where we want to be. Well, what does that mean? Sorry, I'm using my hands. Where do you start? So how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we started with the 1-2 properties. In the 1 year we had 3, and then the equity, the appreciation, we were able to refinance, pull out capital, buy more. Then we had, some savings, but everything you do should always point back to your longer term goals and objectives. You need to identify what are your income requirements down the road. From what sources will you get your income? Do you have an income gap? How can real estate shore up that gap? So find good partners who know their communities. If you're looking to do the JVs, find good investment working partners who have been successful, have a good track record. That they will carry you along for their ride, so to speak, but do a lot of good research and investigation and make a sound decision that enables you to sleep at night based on your risk tolerance, right? So
Amazing. And then also just doing it. Like, I think a lot of people get in that like analysis by paralysis, and they don't know where to go and they're nervous, but just like taking that first one. I know for me, my first property was the hardest one because you don't know what you should do. But as soon as you get there, you get the next one and then you just keep going. So I think that's awesome. So I really appreciate you guys coming on this.
That went by really fast. I hope it went by fast for everybody else too.
Well, you had so much advice. Like, I don't know how, people couldn't have got value from that. So thank you so much. And I'll pass it back to Justin for the final closing.
Yeah, wonderful. You guys absolutely killed it. I think, pairing Lindsay up to do the Q&A is so nice because watching her journey has been incredible. I know, you're pouring into others, and we just wanted to give you our platform. So, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you really enjoy your Saturday, and I'm sure our journey and our friendship will continue for a very long time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting us and to be guests on your podcast. Really appreciate it.